Today we will speak on the sixth planet retrograde and its possible effects. So if we start at the lower right-hand corner, we can see exactly which planets are retrograde and go from there. So if we see the screen here, the planets that are currently in retrograde are Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So normally, people will explain the planets once again going from the sun and ending at Pluto. But in this particular example, I will go from Pluto and end at the sun. I will also have a time lapse video towards the end to further illustrate all of the things I will not touch on directly here. So before we go any further, let's look at the actual dignities of the planets. For example, we see that Mercury is exalted, Jupiter is in its fall, Saturn is in the rulership sign, and Neptune is in the fall. So when it comes to this sixth planet retrograde, which will last until October the 6th, 2021. So this is about a 10-day period with a sixth planet retrograde. And once that sixth planet retrograde fizzles out, we will have a remaining 5-planet retrograde till the 10th of October, which activated on the 19th of August. So the 5-planet retrograde has been active since August, and it will end a couple of days after the 6th planet retrograde. So once again, this particular 6th planet retrograde is only in effect for 10 days. So expect these next 10 days to be supercharged, especially with the strong and the weak planets. For example, the strongest planet in this particular case will be Mercury because it is exalted. Then the next powerful planet will be Saturn because it is in its ruler sign of Capricorn. And these alignments are Vedic. And I have the draconic alignments at the upper left-hand corner, which we will deal with a bit later. Now, in terms of the planets that may give us issues, these planets are Jupiter and Neptune because they are in their fall. So first, let's take a look at Mercury and Saturn, as these are the strong planets. We can connect them and we can go towards our midpoints, which I have up here. So if we look at the midpoints and we look at the midpoint between Mercury and Saturn, which is here, we see that the midpoint between Mercury and Saturn is 17 degrees Scorpio. When Scorpio is in 17 degrees, it is also being influenced by the sun. And we also know Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. So essentially, we have a combination of the sun and Pluto combining with Mercury and Saturn. So this Mercury-Saturn equals Sun-Pluto gives us this energy sequence. Whenever we are dealing with Saturn and Mercury, Saturn gives depth to the thoughts of Mercury. And when Saturn gives depth to the thoughts of Mercury, our thoughts become more philosophical, more in depth about whatever is occurring. In this particular case, it is the sun and Pluto. When the sun and Pluto comes together, in the case of the Six of Cups in any tarot deck, the alignments are the sun and Pluto, or those are the planets that influence that particular card. And that particular cards deal with resurrection, to resurrect from the dead. Because Pluto represents death, but it also represents regeneration, as the sun represents life or spirit. So when the sun and Pluto comes together, we have a rejuvenating energy. And this is what I mean by to resurrect from the dead, to rejuvenate the spirit or the soul. And in order to rejuvenate the soul, it will take philosophical thought or controlled thought, as Saturn also represents control and compression. So in order to rejuvenate our spirit in these particular times, we must give study to our personal philosopher. So some people study the works of Plato. Some people study the works of Aristotle. There are many Greek philosophers, and going beyond Greek or Greece, we can see the philosophical thought all over the planet. So whichever philosophical thought or whichever philosopher that we resonate with, this will be the time to study their works, or to even create your own philosophy if you do not resonate with anyone else's philosophy. Now, in terms of the weaker planets of Jupiter and Neptune, let's see what the midpoint is. So if we go back up and we look for Jupiter and Neptune, we see that it is located here. So the midpoint between Jupiter and Neptune is 8 degrees Aquarius. When Aquarius is in 8 degrees, it is being influenced also by the planet Venus. And we understand Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. So we have a planetary combination of Venus and Uranus after the Jupiter and Neptune. So we have a Jupiter, Neptune equals Venus, Uranus. So whenever we have the combinations of Jupiter and Neptune, what we find is Neptune representing the spirit or the psychic realm, and Jupiter representing divination, our ability to activate the tarot or any other tool to gain additional insight into invisible forces or psychic forces when they are being filtered through Venus and Uranus. We understand Uranus to represent the occult mind or the astrologer's mind. And Venus represents shape and form or geometry. So when Venus and Uranus combine, it brings shape and form to the occult mind or the astrological mind. It helps us to understand the geometry behind high science. And the high science just represents the psychic world or the psychic plane. So when we combine all of these attributes, we have divination upon psychic forces that allow us to gain the necessary geometry to understand the higher sciences. So in other words, to be able to properly divine when it comes to the geometry of astrology and the occult as a whole. So Jupiter wants to take us deeper into our unconscious mind of Neptune. So this can represent dream interpretation or dream divination in order to access your occult mind so that you can give shape and form to the things that are normally mysterious, which was spoken about a bit in yesterday's video concerning the Mercury retrograde. I also have the aspects here to give us even more detail as the planets combined and create new variations. For example, if we see the conjunctions that are active, we see that there is a conjunction with Venus and Saturn, and there's a conjunction with Sun and Mars. So when it comes to the conjunction of Venus and Saturn, which is our ability to beautify the harshness of reality, as Saturn represents the real world, it represents the hard lessons and the harsh truth of reality. So when Venus combines with Saturn, and Venus brings the beautification towards the harshness of life, now we are able to find comfort in the things that are challenging, to find comfort in challenges. So in this particular energy signature, it is promoting us to face challenges, but do it from a perspective of comfort and pleasure. To find pleasure in things that are not so comfortable or not so much where we tend to essentially, if we want to understand Saturn, because this is dealing with the energy of the devil, because the Capricorn card in the tarot is the devil. And we know traditionally Saturn also rules Aquarius before Uranus was discovered. So Saturn would be the original ruler of not just Capricorn, but also Aquarius. And we understand Venus rules over not just Taurus, but also Libra. So when we have the energy of essentially the devil and the star, because the star is represented as Aquarius. So we have a combination of the devil and the star, or lower energies being transmuted into higher energies, cardinal energies being transmuted to higher energies. And when it comes to Venus being the ruler of the Hierophant, as well as the energy of justice, the Hierophant of justice, or the priest of justice. So we have the priest of justice combining with the sun and Mars. When the sun enters into Mars, it supercharges our willpower, as the sun represents our spirit and Mars represents our will, our vitality, or our energy. So now our will, vitality, and energy is being supercharged by our spirit, by our soul force. So this gives us a very enterprising spirit, once again. And when that enterprising spirit combines with the depth of Saturn and the beautification of Venus, what we get in total is the enterprising spirit wants to beautify what we will usually call a painful experience or a traumatic experience or a hard experience, to show forth the beauty in struggle. And in order to see the beauty in the struggle, we must be enterprising spirits. Because when we are enterprising spirits, we are constantly taking on new challenges and learning ways to harmonize these challenges into our lives so that we find comfort in things that before gave us discomfort. If we look at the squares of the particular aspects, there's a square with Mercury and Pluto. There's a square with the Moon and Neptune. And there's a square with Venus and Jupiter. Squares just represent the need to hit the energy with a hammer so that the energy can be crushed and destroyed, so that we can set new energy sequences into motion. So whenever we see squares, this is energies that need to be reset, because it is creating an impasse. An impasse just represents a stalemate. So whenever we see squares, we are seeing a stalemate occur, where the energies cannot do anything for each other. They're just piling up on top of each other. It's like dead energy just gathering in a room. And the window needs to be open so that the energy in the womb can elevate itself and transmute itself. So the energies that need to be transmuted in this particular sequence is Mercury and Pluto. Pluto already represents transformation. So when transformation meets Mercury, this is a transformation of our thinking. Not only transformation of our thinking, transformation of our penmanship. And not just transformation of our penmanship, transformation of our voice or our speech. So Mercury and Pluto wants us to transform our voice or speech, our thoughts, as well as our penmanship, what we write. So our ability to speak, write, and think needs to be reconfigured. When it comes to the Moon and Neptune, we understand the Moon represents the public and Neptune represents the unconscious mind. So this represents the public unconscious. So the public unconscious, or the collective unconscious, needs to be recalibrated. Or essentially, it is an impasse or stalemate when it comes to the public. The public feels overall a stalemate when it comes to the situations that are going on in the world. the world overall feels like it is at a standstill or a stalemate, and it is mostly dealing with psychic forces, or as we call disease, because these are the forces of Neptune, all things that are invisible and deceptive, as well as spiritual. So when the world is at a standstill, it forces us to go into our own psyche and clear out any emotional turmoil that may be present. So on a personal level, it is time for us to cleanse our unconscious mind or our karmic forces by utilizing the force or purity of the moon, which represents our inner world or subconscious mind. So we must use our subconscious to purify the unconscious, which is the darkest elements of ourselves. So we must use our idea of heaven to shed light upon the darker elements that need to be cleansed and purified. Next, we have the square of Venus and Jupiter. We understand once again, Jupiter is divination and Venus represents geometry, the golden ratio, for example. So because it is a stalemate between Venus and Jupiter, the shapes and the forms that we are seeing currently does not match with our ability to expand our horizons. So essentially all of the imagery, all of the advertisements, all of the marketing, all the things we see on TV, the internet, and all of these forms where we go to gather information or for entertainment or to pass time, all of the geometry that we see is not in accordance to expanding our horizons or activating our ability to divine. So in other words, all of the imagery that we see before us needs to be changed. So essentially it is time to change around our geometry. So to recalibrate your home, or at least your room or your office space, to change around your feng shui, basically. The feng shui of your home, as well as your workplace, if you can afford to, or if you are allowed to make any transformations or changes, do so. So whatever changes you can make to the geometry of your home or the geometry of your workplace, reconfigure that energy if possible. Now, we're not going to go through every single alignment here. I'm just going through each alignment to give us a perspective as to how these energies are occurring with the planetary combinations. I also have the wheel down here on the lower left-hand side so that we can see all these energies from a different perspective. We can see what energies are working together. So we see in the 11th house, we see that conjunction with the sun and Mars. And because it is in the 11th house of cyberspace, we must apply that enterprising spirit to the internet or cyberspace to build the cyber community. And because they are being expressed by Virgo, who is the researcher, Virgo wants to research. Virgo is the hermit. The hermit wants to do everything remotely, remote research. And because it's dealing with the internet or cyberspace, to enter into cyberspace remotely or secretly. Because the opposite of Virgo is Pisces, which is the invisible forces. So to utilize our ability to conduct research anonymously or to enter into the cyberspace anonymously to engage in your enterprising spirit. So in other words, we understand that people sell products and engage with the internet without ever showing their faces, without you ever knowing exactly who they are. However, they are able to present their ideas in the form of video, so on and so forth, where they don't really need to show their face as long as they can tell the story and to convey the message. We also have the graphic inference. And we see the dates up here. We have 9/27/2021 to October 6, 2021, which is the total duration of the sixth planet retrograde. So this shows the planetary movements. Now, of course, we're not going to see too much movement because this is over a 10-day period, which is not long. But whenever the lines cross each other, that means activity will occur. So the only place we see lines crossing each other, once again, is with the Sun and Mars at the 150-degree mark. So if you look at the 150-degree mark, we see the lines of the Sun and the lines of Mars slowly begin to pass each other towards the end. So if you look at the 150 degrees here, we see that the two lines of Mars and the Sun cross each other, which creates the conjunction that we see. So I'm just showing many different angles of what is occurring. And all this is coming from the Vedic perspective. Now let us look at the Draconic perspective to give us a little bit more insight into the karmic forces. So if we compare the Vedic as well as the Draconic energies, we will see the differences. So let me lay both differences out before we wrap up the video so that we can see the differences here. So once again, if we look at the sixth planet retrograde and we look at all of the planets and zodiac signs involved, we have Mercury in Virgo, Jupiter in Capricorn, Saturn in Capricorn, Uranus in Aries, Neptune in Aquarius, and Pluto in Sagittarius. Now, what are the differences between the Draconic perspective? If we write out the Draconic perspective, we see that there are slight differences, or maybe more than slight differences. So in this case, Mercury is in Leo. Jupiter is in Sagittarius, as well as Saturn. Uranus is in Neptune. Or Pisces, rather. Neptune is in Capricorn. And Pluto is in Scorpio. So if we see the changes, we have the difference between Mercury in Virgo versus Mercury in Leo. We have Jupiter in Capricorn versus Jupiter in Sagittarius. We have Saturn in Capricorn versus Saturn in Sagittarius. We have Uranus and Aries versus Uranus and Pisces. We have Neptune in Aquarius versus Neptune in Capricorn. And we have Pluto in Sagittarius versus Pluto in Scorpio. Now, if we look at the draconic breakdown, we explained Mercury and Leo in the last video, so we will not explain that. But we will explain the other dynamics. So because we have a combination of Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mercury, if we combine all of these factors together, we have necromantic, psychic, occult, control, divination, and thought and or penmanship. So Pluto takes us to the inferno. Neptune takes us to the astral. Uranus takes us to the cyber world. Saturn represents the world stage. Sorry, I should probably write it over here. Images are overlapping. Jupiter represents law, as well as divination. And once again, Mercury is the pen. So Pluto is bringing forth a transformation in our unconscious mind. Transformation of the unconscious mind that awakens our occultic thoughts or our higher thoughts so that we can understand high science, such as astrology and all things occult, to give us better control over the law, universal law, to gain better control over universal law, which is what we tap into when we activate our ability to control what is called our divination ability. Divination comes from our ability to control our psychic forces, but not only control the psychic forces, we must be able to interpret the psychic forces, tapping into our higher self, as most people will call it. Tapping into our higher self is just tapping into Uranus. Tapping into the astral world or the psychic world is Neptune. Tapping into the inferno or transformation is Pluto. So once again, the transformation of the unconscious mind to better understand occultic thinking so that you can control your universal law. Activate divination so that your pen begins to move in accordance to all things that were previously mentioned. So because it ends with Mercury, it ends in our ability to utilize our penmanship or to upgrade our penmanship. So the whole purpose of these next 10 days is to keep a pen handy, whether it's a cyber pen on a tablet or pen and pad. Keep a pen handy because all of the revelations will end up coming through your speech, your thought, or your pen. And the pen gives us more detail than speech because we can get even more detailed when we are writing something out versus speaking it or explaining it or even thinking it. We can go deeper into thought if we are writing down our thoughts and we can go deeper into our words and speech if we know what we're going to say before we say it. This is why when we present a speech, most of the time we have points that we have already premeditated so that it flows smoothly. So we have both perspectives here, the draconic perspective as well as the Vedic perspective, to give us an overall view of what is occurring for the next 10 days, to be the enterprising spirit and to crystallize all of these psychic forces into the pen. So once again, I will have a time lapse of more details that was not explained here. Now will appear again very soon. I bear peace. 93.